welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
In this episode, we'll break down former President Donald Trump's town hall last week on CNN and a recent poll on trust in the media with our special guest, Pat Kessler. We'll also break down the scheduled end of the legislative session. We'll have another edition of The Food Fight with Brodkorb and Becky, where we debate our different takes on food. In this episode, we will debate our top 5 sodas, and we'll end this episode with our tweets of the week. We're excited for you to join us, and we hope you enjoy this week's episode.
We are incredibly happy to be joined this episode by one of the most knowledgeable political reporters in Minnesota, Pat Kessler. Pat started with Minnesota Public Radio, but most of us know him from his 36 years with WCCO. If there was a major political story or a minor political story in Minnesota in the last 40 years, Pat Kessler was either breaking the news to Minnesotans or explaining to them why they should care about it or be interested in it. He is a Minnesota institution. And as for a podcast that focuses on breaking down public policy, politics, and general what's going on in Minnesota from the political perspective, I cannot think of someone who would be more knowledgeable to have on this episode and be a guest of the show. And we hope that this experience is enjoyable for him, where this could be the start of something where he'll come back and talk with us. But we wanted to talk with Pat Kessler today. And Pat, can you hear us okay? We're glad to have you on the show.
I'm so grateful that you invited me. Thank you so much. I love the podcast. A longtime listener, first-time guest.
You are, and not to make you bashful, but you are a Minnesota institution, and it is such a privilege to have you on today. As I was typing that up, I was, since it's accurate. I don't want you to have to do a reality check of your own appearance on the show, but you have been involved in Minnesota politics for, you were with WCCO for 36 years. Prior to that, with Minnesota Public Radio. I think the 84 presidential race was one of your first big races you covered in Minnesota. So you've been a part of certainly our listeners' years, but certainly my formative years in Minnesota politics, seeing you reporting on TV, but then interacting with you at the state capitol and other things. It's just a real treat to have you on today, and just on a personal level.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, and you've always been so important to me, and I love seeing people like you, Becky. We need the younger folks to come in, and Michael, you're much younger than I am, but seeing the new generation is something that is so important. And thank you for that overly kind introduction, because it's been a great run. I had a great run.
But you still have your toe a little bit involved. You're still doing some analysis. You're still doing stories. So we haven't lost you completely.
That is correct. I like to call myself the old guy emeritus. They call me in at WCCO television if there's an election, if there is an infection or an insurrection. I tend to, so I keep going. I keep going. So it's been a great time going back, and then I do radio still. So I'm still very busy and enjoy this immensely.
Becky, you've interacted with Pat over the years, correct?
Absolutely, yes. When I worked for Congressman Emmer, Congressman Lewis, a number of different folks, definitely have had interactions, and certainly, one of the good ones. There's a lot of good ones out there, but, Pat, you've been one that I think always does a good job of telling the story, sticking to facts, and making sure that listeners or viewers understand the full picture of the interview or story that is being shared.
And I appreciate that so much coming from you, Becky, because as Michael and I have talked about in the past, being accessible to reporters, as you both have been, is so important. And you take your job seriously. And if I may say this, you don't take yourself as seriously as you take your job. So I love that about you. You always treated us with good humor and professionalism. And that's how we have to work in this system, particularly with public officials and with journalists. That's just the way it has to be.
When Becky and I started talking about doing a podcast, we sat with a number of people and sat down and came up with a list of people that we wanted to have on the podcast. And Pat Kessler, Pat was on the list immediately. He was one of the first names mentioned. And that's because of your institutional knowledge, your experience, And there's a variety of subjects that we could have you to come on, and we want to have you come on. One subject I just want to just briefly mention is always enjoyed your reality checks. As someone who worked in communications and opposition research, getting a passing grade or some type of quality mark on a reality check was critically important. And I will also say to the political nerds out there and to the people who sometimes are political nerds who sometimes get frustrated with the media. I will tell you, as someone who's designed campaign ads, worked with campaigns, this is where the media plays such an important role, because making sure that you run an ad that can pass a Pat Kessler fact check or a reality check absolutely factors into the constructions of ads. And so when you have media that's doing reality checks, that's fact checking the politicians, that makes campaigns more accountable to the public and to media. It's a very important public service. And I just want to just say again, one of the many hats you wore that I respected was certainly the reality check.
And I'm troubled to bring this up because one of the issues, I think, is that I wonder if it mattered, because first started with fact checking, it was new and innovative back in the day. But now you could have fact check 24 hours a day. There's a torrent of misinformation, disinformation, camouflage, misdirection, all of that, and it's more than it's ever been before. It's not less. And so, figuring out new ways to do it, I think, is really important for young people in this profession.
If I may ask, the first campaign I worked on was Boschwitz, Wellstone 96. My understanding was that your first year you did the reality checks? Because I remember there being some reality check discussion.
Yes, that was the first time we ever did that, and it was hugely controversial. We took great care to make sure we found misinformation or spin, and it was spin back then. It wasn't deliberate lies as we see today. And it was very controversial because that took us out of the role of what was thought of as a traditional reporter. This person said this. On the other hand, this person says that. They were equal. And we, for the first time, were making a judgment on what was more equal than others, or what was true, what was false, what was misleading. So hugely controversial in the day, but people came to accept it, and it became very common over the years.
Michael and I did a little of our homework in preparation for this and listened to an interview you did with Ben Lieber. And one of the things that I think was interesting that you discussed there was misinformation versus disinformation. And can you kind of walk through what those words mean to you, and maybe how that's evolved over the last couple of years, maybe even
Yeah,
decade?
it's a great question because misinformation to me, is leaving out some information. It might be a little bit of spin, which I completely accept as part of the role of a public official or a candidate who is running for election. Here's my view. Here's my spin on this. I accept that. It's misinformation. Disinformation is the deliberate uh, uh, dissemination, the deliberate speaking of different things in a campaign that are either not true, you know them to be not true, they have a very, very basic truth or not truth to them, and you use it anyway. So it's when a politician says something that is not true, knowing it's not true. I would call that disinformation. And again, camouflaging, misinformation, spin. I I'm not going to ever say it's okay because I much prefer everybody's transparent, but I understand the role that different people play in order to get elected. This is You're appealing to your voters, so that is one of the that's one of the differences that I see.
I believe I probably know the answer to this, but do you believe that we see more of that disinformation now than we did 10 years ago?
Much, much more, and disinformation is kind of a polite word. I've always tried to avoid the word lie. And I'm thinking, and I have to, I'm pretty sure, because we had many discussions about this in the newsroom. I never use the word lie in a story. We would never say this person is lying, this person is a liar, this is a lie. We would say this is not true or this is true. So and now I do feel that there is deliberate lying that goes on, and people know it's a lie, and they say it anyway. And that's one of the biggest differences that I see. And it's a tremendous challenge for reporters, and particularly young reporters, who have to corral this into one place, because I dealt with television ads, political speeches, and TV. And basically, nowadays, we have to deal with all manner of different platforms on social media, radio, podcasting, uh, uh, television commercials, Facebook, TikTok, all of it we have to deal with. And it's really, really difficult to get it into one place.
I will share a Pat Kessler story that I have that reminds me of, and it goes to I think his it's an example of, I think, his fidelity to the truth and his desire to pursue it. Remember when I was deputy chair of the party, I was asked by Pat Kessler at a press conference at MNGP headquarters if I believed that Barack Obama was born and was qualified to be president, because there was a birther movement that was moving around at that time, and it had percolated with a lot of the activists. I remember discussing it with the research director at the time, Mark Drake, that we knew you were there. We knew the question was possibly going to come up, and we went over it. And we knew that we had to deal with it head on. And I did not subscribe to the school of thought. The conspiracy theory at the time was that Barack Obama was not a legal resident of the United States, and that there was some birther movement. I never subscribed to that. But I remember you asking me at a press conference about it, and it was a well questioned, well formed, well structured, good question, and I had a responsibility to answer it. I took some heat for my answer, but it was a good question that you asked, and what it reminds me of is you and Becky were talking, and it was a great question by Becky. It reminded me about just your kind of shoe leather kind of beat reporting was always kind of about the facts, and I think it's remarkable. I think it's honorable. I think it's what journalism should do. And I just wanted to share that little tidbit that I had. I've been on the receiving end of more than one of your kind of inquiries about facts, but that was one that it didn't seem very significant at the time. But I think it was the start of, I think, the introduction of the kind of the conspiracy about whether Barack Obama was was a natural, his birth, where he was
The
born, the long
movement,
form, all that
awesome,
movement.
something
I think
different.
yeah, I think it really was kind of the start of the kind of misinformation movement, and you were on it back then. And I just wanted to share that with our listeners.
Well, that is a time I remember that things were really beginning to percolate all around the country, including here in Minnesota. And what year was that? Would that be 2000?
2009 or 10.
So fairly late.
2009 or 10.
That would be fairly.
Probably two.
And many of the conspiracy theories which were beginning to blossom. And remember, did the iPhone come into being in 2010? It's right around that time. And then we started to have different social media sites, like Twitter and Facebook, primarily at the time. So a lot of things were spreading, and now it's to the point where it's much different. Where truth, false things that are false, lies become the truth, and the truth becomes a lie, and there's hardly any way to stop it.
What's interesting, it's a good segue to the topic that we wanted to have you on about, was, as we all remember and all know, is that then private citizen Donald Trump was one of the initial pushers of the birther movement and that agenda. And the subject that we wanted to have you on to talk about was the recent CNN town hall meeting and your perspective on it. It occurred last week. There's been a lot of debate in the media about and amongst the general public about the appropriateness of CNN doing that town hall meeting. Becky and I have perspectives. I think it's fair to say, and I'll let Becky describe herself, but I certainly am not a supporter of President Trump. I didn't vote for him in 16 or 20. And we have a mixed relationship with him on this podcast. But I wanted to get your perspective on the decision by CNN to have him on, and in particular, fact checking in real time, because you have such a strong role in kind of even before Snoops and other websites that are out there fact checking, leading a role in that type of stuff. Your perspective on that event and the
Yeah, and
appropriateness of it.
it's such a great question, you guys, because it's two separate questions. Number one, should CNN have done it? And number two, the execution of it. How well did they do it? And I'm in the camp, and I don't know exactly where either one of you fits, and I'd love to hear this. I believe, of course, you got to do it. Of course, you've got to have the former president of the United States, who is the leading candidate for president in the Republican Party, and not even close, by far, and more likely than any other candidate right now to be the next president of the United States. Yes, you have to have him, and how do you do it is the more important question to me. Yeah, you got to have him on, and I know people are boycotting CNN and highly critical of that decision, but it's not even close to me. You've got to have him on, and I'd love to know what you think, and we can move on to the next part. But that's it's a no brainer to me.
I agree. I think that it's one of those things that folks don't like to give him more time. I know there was some reports back before even the 2016 election about the amount of earned media that Trump got versus Hillary Clinton and other candidates, even pre-primary, and just how much, maybe, different outlets gave him a hand up by giving him this attention. However, in this situation, he is the running, the front runner for the Republican nomination. He is a former president. And we do owe it to voters of across the spectrum the right to hear from him, whether you like it or not, whether it's setting up Democrats' ways to attack him, whether it's setting up DeSantis and other ways to go against him, or just to hear really what we're getting and remind folks of that. So I think absolutely they needed to do it. I'm glad to do it. For the record, again, we'll make it clear my name is Becky Scherr, and I am not a Trump supporter. I do hope we have somebody else, but it needed to be done. Absolutely.
I agree with Becky. My name is Michael Brodkorb, and I'm not a Trump supporter. I didn't vote for him in 16 and 20. But that being said, if people are frustrated about the fact that CNN had an obligation to do that, I think it's more a reflection on the party and politics. That the truth of the matter is that he's the front runner for the nomination. And based on recent polling, you could make the case that he is the front runner to potentially win, that he's in the driver's seat right now in the race. And it's on. I was frustrated in watching it. But the reality is that we can't. I don't think it's the role of the media to turn a blind eye to who the front runner is. This isn't some random third party. It's the Republican Party, and they're a major party at every level of government. And so the front runner, I think, deserves that type of attention. Does it frustrate me? Yes. I wish it was someone else, but it does. It did warrant the attention.
Now, so then I guess the question becomes, was the execution a problem? Because I thought that this town hall was a blank show. I do. I thought it was disgraceful. The forum, as it unfolded in front of our eyes like a slow motion car crash, was shameless. I thought it was nasty. He was unapologetic, extremely mendacious. And CNN did little or nothing, futile attempts to try to curb what was clearly falsehoods, things he was saying that were not true, that could clearly be described as lies. And they didn't do anything to push back enough. And that's only one of the things that I had a problem with. I had a bigger problem with another part that we can talk about in a moment.
So my question for you, because while I agree, on your side of things, if you were in the role as moderator or behind the scenes, what things would you have liked to see to do more of that fact checking, the calling her out, because I believe Caitlin Collins did at times attempt. I believe this is not something that we were shocked that Trump was going to try to railroad the situation. But what would you like to see there?
Yeah, I thought Caitlin Collins did a great job. What can you do when you have a torrent, a flood, a tsunami of that kind of falsity coming right at you? Things that are just separated, untethered from reality. What do you do? So I thought she did a really good job. And I should also say that the breaking news on the day we're recording this podcast is that she's been promoted. She's going to
Mm-hmm.
get the primetime CNN news slot that was once held by Chris Cuomo. So I don't think that's hurt her. And I've always respected her as a reporter. But I've been in these situations, and I've interviewed Trump. I've been to many Trump rallies, all of this kind of stuff, and it's really, really difficult. But I've also been in situations on a local level in our local CBS affiliate, WCCO, where we planned way ahead of time for these kinds of anything that could go wrong in public events, like a U.S. Senate debate or a governor's debate. We go over the questions, we go over what could possibly go wrong, who's in the audience, whether or not the lighting is right, how are the cameras going to behave. We did shot blocking, as we call it. You block the shots for every candidate, which has been criticized in this town hall. But most of all, you've got to have some sort of fact checking capability. If it's something as simple as a graphic that you put up on the screen when the president says something that is completely false. And very simple. One example would be where Caitlin Collins says, "Well, Mr. President, you said that you would suspend the Constitution if it meant getting a fair, fixing the rigged elections." I never said I'd terminate the Constitution. I never said that. Well, you can put up a soundbite or a graphic of his tweet where he says exactly that. Something as simple as that. And you can do it in a polite way. Hold on, Mr. President. Let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at what you said on this day. Just to kind of stop that steamroller, because he was in command of the room. He was an alpha. He was completely in control of the whole hour. That's just one small example. But I mean, we did learn some stuff too, but that's just one small example that I would fact check him on.
Do you think it's difficult to do that with a former president? Do you think that there is a difficulty?
Very much.
Again, to repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Caitlin Collins is great. I think she's worthy of the promotion. It's going to be great to watch her in that time slot. I think she did as best as she could. I think she did as good as anyone else was going to do. There's a part of me that thinks that the institution of CNN could have done more to put her in a better
that's just
situation.
one of the things that I talk about, like having blocking out the shots in a different way, having a fact check capability. You've got one of the biggest news organizations in the world, and to not be prepared with pieces of paper or graphics or all of that you put up. But I concur that it's difficult to interview a president, any president, because you have to walk the line of respect for the institution and the office and then hold somebody accountable. But you've never had a president like this who has no respect for the norms, for the traditions. Frankly, there is no bottom to the things that he might say. But the one big problem, I think, with this CNN town hall was the audience itself, where remember that all of the things I made a short list. It's actually a long list, but I'll only read a couple of them. The things that the former president said: he's going to pardon the January 6th the rioters. He would solve the war in 24 hours. He mocked the sexual assault victim that he was convicted of the sexual abuse the day before. And he said he would suspend the Constitution, all of this. But let's focus on the woman, the assault from the day before, where a jury in New York City found him liable for sexual assault against the newspaper columnist from 20 years ago. He mocked her, and the audience just laughed and cheered. Oh, rape. Oh, that's so funny. Sexual assault. Tee hee hee.
Mhm.
At some point, I wonder, and I've seen other town halls where you do this, where you interact more with the audience. You stop it down, you go into the audience to the people who are laughing and say, why are you laughing? What is funny about this? That would have been shocking. It might have been it might have been a way to bring all of this back to some sort of reality, to ground it in some way. But I think it was a runaway train.
Yeah, I think, Michael and I think that goes right into a lot of our frustration that we talk about with the Republican Party as a whole. I think Michael and I both identify on some level of the spectrum with as being Republicans. I'll let Michael say if he's bowing out of that at any point. Um, but and that is our frustration, because this is, now this platform that we all agree should have been given to the president is also being given to these Republicans, representing the Republican Party. And it's unfortunate, it's sad, it's embarrassing. And that's something that, we're kind of trying to hopefully, with this podcast, try to show that there are, I don't know if I want to call us sane, but quote unquote sane Republicans out there,
Absolutely, there are.
because it is upsetting.
Absolutely, there are, and so the selection of an audience in this particular case was important. And I haven't actually seen a really good explanation of why. I get it that you want to get people who might have voted for Trump in 2016 or 2020, but there was nobody else. There were no independents that I could see, or they featured anybody who was really skeptical of the president. It did seem like full on red flag, red hat MAGA, red pill MAGA people in there. But you say sane Republicans, of course there are. I mean, but they are not getting. Many Republicans are not getting, and the platform in order to talk about what are quote unquote normal Republicans. And I have to say this: the Republican leaders are not helping in this regard as the presidential campaign heats up.
No, and I think that I think that the town hall, the way it was structured in a way, I think will at the end of the day, it will boost Donald Trump's standing in the
Sure,
race.
absolutely.
I think it brought a carnival like atmosphere to the race for president, which a lot of people sometimes like. They like the entertainment value. There was a number of lines I think that were crossed by some of the supporters in the audience. I understand the arguments from CNN, that leadership, that they've said that this is a section of America that that can't be ignored. And so they need to draw some attention to those issues. But I think there could have been some things done to help present a more professional environment for that town hall to happen. But unfortunately, Republicans, I have to accept some responsibility for that. This wasn't like it was an undercover Mike Wallace ambush on the street. This was a town hall meeting. They knew the cameras were on, and this is how they acted. And I think it brought out the reality sometimes of the unfortunate nature of politics these days, and the kind of the ugliness that can happen.
Well, by degree, I agree that I think that former President Trump did something that might even be called valuable, because normally he's a little vague on where he stands. He's suggestive. He won't actually say something, but he said things here that, if he's reelected, uh, that we could probably count on. I mean, you got a pretty clear idea that he says that the United States should go into default in this big default debate. I think that was pretty clear. That he said he will pardon the January 6th rioters. That was very, very clear. He did not say whether Russia or Ukraine should win. I think, of course, that raises the issue of future military aid to Ukraine. So that was helpful to see, but I think most of America already knew this, and that was Trump 2.0 or 3.0 now.
One of the discussions that's come out of it is whether it is the responsibility of the media to make news. And that's one of the discussions that came out, is that and some folks have said it's our job to make news, and others have said, no, it's your job to report the news. I think that, and I'd like to get your perspective on this, at least the way I see it. CNN engages in both, in a sense, and these cable news networks do. There's straight reporting that they do, but they also have opinions. They also have shows that where they invite guests on and draw out comments and stuff. Do you think your take on the role of the media is to report news, not make news?
That's the first time I think I've ever been asked that question, and I've thought about it in some ways, but there is a difference between making news and breaking news, and they're two different things, and they both are valuable in their own way. After this town hall, I see that CNN executives were saying, "Well, she made news. Caitlin Collins made news, and we made news on this." And it's more than just drawing out information. It was almost as if they wanted to make news. I get it. I totally get that. That is part of the job. But breaking news is something a little bit different. It's when you find out something that no one else has and you want to be first with it. So those are two different things. I think they're both valuable, but the I was always really reluctant to, how do I say this? I was really reluctant to push something that I knew would make news, but I was making it bigger than it should be. You have to figure out where something fits in a news story. But I think both of those are probably valuable, Michael and Becky. You probably were on involved in a lot of things like that in your career, still are.
Yeah, it's definitely a fine line to know how things go and what actually is reporting the news, what's getting clicks, what's trying to, at times, I've worked for some not quiet,
Sure.
meek individuals
Yeah.
who, at times, I think that there were certainly different
Well,
folks
can I
who
ask this
were.
question? I don't mean to interrupt, but it's so interesting because when reporters come into you when you've got some of your really great candidates or elected officials, do you always wonder if they're in there to make news out of your guy?
I would say, a good like 75-80% of the time, having the relationships, like I knew putting somebody in front of you, I wasn't worried about, some salacious, question. If there was something of topic that you needed to ask about, that was fair. If there was something we were expecting to come up, but I didn't have to worry about you trying to, get something on the front page of the Washington Post or the New Yorker or something. And I think there's some reporters where you're always kind of like, well, this they could definitely ask that. So I think it's less about every interview and more about who the interviews are with, if that's going to be the
I'm really
case.
sorry to interrupt you, but it was so interesting remembering what you do.
Yeah, and I think that's again, it's really just there are a lot of really really good reporters out there. There's a lot of really good journalists that I've worked with and I've met along the way, and then there's some that there you definitely do see some of those folks who have more opinions that they're trying to insert the story, or sometimes you hear the questions they're asking, and their story's already written, and they're just trying to get that quote that fits into their pre-written story. And so that's where they're going. And so, yeah, it depends on the
Really,
person, certainly is.
really interesting.
Do you think, as we segue into our next subject, do you think that CNN's standing and how people feel about CNN and the media was enhanced by the town hall meeting, or do you think it was didn't make a difference?
Is it okay if I say I don't know? I
Of course it
really
is.
don't know. I think if the goal of CNN was to enhance its standing, I don't know that was accomplished. If it is just to truly to say, we have this opportunity to present you the leading candidate for president of the United States. This is news. Probably, but that's a really hard question to answer.
And the subject that we want to transition into is there is a recent poll that came out by The Economist and YouGov, published the results asking Americans where they get their news from and how much they trusted 22 prominent media organizations. We'll link to the poll when we release this episode. But at the top of the list was the Weather Channel, PBS, BBC, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and then the Associated Press. CNN was in roughly the same place as the National Review, the New York Post, and other kind of somewhat of opinion commentaries. What does the fact that the most trusted news sources are the Weather Channel and PBS, what does that offer to you about where Americans have their faith and trust in media right now?
Well, first of all, who doesn't love the Weather Channel? I mean,
I know I do.
seriously.
Yes.
In a part of the country, we are in the Midwest and in the upper Midwest, the Great North. Weather is news every single day of the year. I mean, who doesn't love Jim Cantori? Who doesn't love everything that they do? I do have questions about this poll. I think overall, 30,000 feet, I think it does reflect that there is a general mistrust and distrust of the media. Um, and I think a lot of this has been stoked by prominent politicians in both parties, Democrat and Republican. So I think it does reflect that. I, I was a little skeptical, to be honest, because PBS and BBC, of course, uh, people tend to love that. But who watches PBS and BBC? I mean, and I don't mean because they're not good, because they're excellent. But who watches all these? And you got 1,500 respondents. I tried to look at the tabs on the poll, and did all 1,500 watch all of these from Weather Channel to Breitbart? I don't know the answer to that. So I wonder if this is more name recognition. And I saw that the Democrats trust MSNBC, no big there.
Mhm.
Yep.
Republicans trust Fox, no big surprise there. But when you look at the poll, it looked like Democrats trust InfoWars more than Republicans trust CNN. Now, does that make
Correct.
sense to you guys? Not.
No, it doesn't. I will say, go ahead.
No,
Pat.
I said not to me in general, but it does overall. I think it reflects in a fairly valid way that people don't trust the quote unquote mainstream media.
Two things. I will say, number one, I think PBS's high ranking was because Becky Scherr made her debut on Almanac on Friday night. So I think that had a big impact in that.
Let's
Oh,
see.
come
Yes.
on.
Yeah, so I was glued, and my household was glued to Almanac to watch Becky's debut appearance on Almanac, which she did a great job.
Well, thanks.
A couple things I will also say, and I'd be curious to get Becky and Pat both your takes on this. I generally rotate through, so I have I watch CNN, Fox, and MSNBC all throughout the day as a way to kind of get the news on a regular basis. Is to get kind of a balance, because I do think there's a little bit of a partisan perspective on all of them. But I'd like to get your take. If you guys are sitting down and watching news at night, what are you watching? If you feel comfortable disclosing, and do you feel the need to kind of cycle through some different media stations?
Go ahead, Ben.
I'll start. I guess, I'll show my age here, and I largely get my news from Twitter, and following the perfectly cultivated feed that I have poured my last 15 years into. And I would say that largely does link, it's a lot of, I mean, very much across the board. I get Washington Post, I get CNN, I get MSNBC, I get some Fox, some Breitbart. I do try to keep my eyes on what I believe, especially in my previous roles, what I believe activists or Republicans would be watching. So I have spent a lot of time reading and watching Fox in my day. But yeah, I don't typically sit down and watch a whole hour long show of anyone unless there's some guest on that I'm looking forward to, and catch most of my stuff on Twitter.
And that's fascinating to hear, because Becky, my kids are very similar to you, and you're probably roughly around the same ages, where it's mostly Twitter, not Facebook. They're not on Facebook, but a lot of the social media sites. YouTube is very big for news. Many most of the young people now get it from social media. 50%, I understand, of young people 18 to 34 get their news from social media. 50%, 50. Now, I still am old school in many ways, where I subscribe to the newspapers, the paper newspapers of locally, the Pioneer Press, the Star Tribune, but also the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. So we have that. But then I go online to look at the rest. I come from a news family. My wife is a news executive also, and from the news business, I should say. And so at night, you know, I think we're sick of it, but we spend a lot of time on all three, just like Michael does. My wife doesn't like to sit down and watch news when she gets home from her news station. You know what I mean?
Can't imagine
And
why.
so we do watch a lot of sports. We watch a lot of sports, and when that gets too much, we will watch the Food Channel and the home. What do you call it? The HGTV, where you fix up the homes, blow them up. So that's our news diet, and also podcasting. Seriously, we listen to a lot of podcasts.
And yes, and I will also say part of the reason I have younger kids, my kids are teenagers, and so they don't. We keep them off social media because we think it's. My wife and I are not big fans of kids being on social media, but we've tried to instill a little bit of balance and awareness into the local media and cable shows and national shows to kind of raise their kind of
Absolutely.
civic IQ.
Yeah. Hey, Michael, I'm really curious what you think, because should there be age limits on social media? And Becky, I mean, you're going to have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
I will say to you as I've said to my kids that it's like old pictures of kids in like the 20s and 30s where they're smoking cigarettes. They didn't realize the health effect. I've said to my kids very frequently that at some point, probably when they're adults, they're going to realize the dangers of social media for younger kids. I as someone who steers my kids away from social media. They don't have full access to any social media. I absolutely think it should be raised because it's very detrimental. Particularly, and I've disclosed this before, having daughters. I think there are a lot of issues
I
that
agree.
can percolate on social media with young kids, and keep raising strong kids, particularly, but also strong females. Social media is sometimes not the best place for young girls, and I worry about that
Becky,
environment a lot.
what are you going to do?
Oh, goodness. That is the $1,000,000 question. I was lucky enough that Facebook just came to be when I was in college and then, it started out just for college kids and that sort. So it was thankfully not around when I was super young. But I will say working on some of the campaigns even, after I would get done with the election cycle, I would have to turn off Twitter. The toxicity of even just, some of the stuff when I worked for Jason Lewis and some of the rhetoric and stuff from the radical liberals against him that would come to me, and being called a gender traitor, to women's species because of working for, Jason Lewis. Getting stuff like that was really tough on my mental health, I will say. And so, I've taken breaks at times. So I absolutely, I mean, I have a 10-month-old, so we're quite a bit away from this, but I absolutely think there's going to be limits in this household to access and where it can be, because it is, there's lots of potential for trouble there. Absolutely.
Sorry. And I know I hear stories about this, and female reporters that I've worked with over the years face all of the same things. And where are we in journalism and in public affairs and all of this, where women get a lot more threats and intimidation and those kinds of messages? And I'm just so sorry to hear this. And somehow, some way, we've got to get our arms around this.
Mm, absolutely. I think it's still going to be a while. I don't think there's any solution in the near future, but we've got a new CEO coming in on Twitter, so we'll have to watch how that plays out.
Pat, I got to remember, just as we close out here today, I got to just share one story. 1996 campaign. I'll go back to one more time. There was one computer in the Boschwitz office that had access to the internet, and no one was allowed to touch it. And I was doing some comms work back then. It was just and so it's amazing how much times have changed with the internet these days.
How'd you distribute your press releases there? Like carrier pigeon?
We had a fax transmission service that we used that did a lot of. I remember having to go in and manually program aside from email was a website. The website was basically Boschwitz's literature, just like scanned in. That was the website back then, and a lot of the press releases were distributed email, going to the press corps, but also And one of my big jobs was programming a fax machine, a fax distribution list on fax machines.
One of my favorite things that I've seen today on this podcast is seeing the smile on Becky's face. Like, oh, that is so cute. What yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we had one in 1996. We had one computer in WCCO television, a major metropolitan market TV station, and one person was allowed to use it and had to make a request in order to do research on Google, something called Google back then. And it cost $5 every time we did it. And so you had to run it by everybody. So, same deal. That's the way it was. And then we walked to school in a snowstorm without boots backwards up a hill. And that's what we did.
Yeah. One last story. My kids asked me once what I watched on Netflix when I was a kid. Yeah. They just asked me what I watched on Netflix when I was a kid.
Asked me
Pat,
television when I was a kid.
Oh, wow. Pat, you have been incredibly gracious with your time today. This has been such a great episode. Again, you are an institution to Minnesota politics, to our state. We hope this experience was enjoyable to the point where you'd consider coming back. I'd love to talk with you more about your work on fact checking, your perspective on the media and other topics that you're so knowledgeable.
Well, it's really been an honor, and I appreciate this opportunity so much. And you guys are fantastic. So please keep doing this. Keep up the good work. It's really fun to listen to.
I could have talked with Pat Kessler for 3 hours.
I know. I mean, like I said, I looked up. I can't believe that we were on for as long as we were. It was easy. He is just so knowledgeable, so easy to talk with. And you completely understand how he had the career he has had to date. I mean, it is just impressive.
And I meant every word I said, that he's a Minnesota institution. I mean, if you want to have, first of all, let's talk about it just from our universe for a second. We have a podcast where we're breaking down politics and policy. He is an absolute subject matter expert on politics, policy in Minnesota for the last 40 years. So he's great to have on. But his depth of the issues on right now, he's still in the game, even though he stepped away a little bit from WCCO. He's back there doing some analysis and other commentary. He's just a tremendous resource, and it's so insightful to have that type of knowledgeable guest on. And it's something that we have talked a lot about having smart people on the show. Every one of our guests has been smart. The dumbest person on this show is me. We've had all these great smart guests, and he was just another one who just hit it out of the park. And again, not to repeat myself, which I'm doing a lot these days, I could have spoken to him for 3 hours.
Absolutely. Although I just have to insert one thing not Kessler related. I feel like that was a really good opportunity to give a zing to Jeff Kolb about our smart guest here.
Nice.
Come on, you missed an opportunity. No, I'm
good, yes.
just kidding. The Honorable Kolb. A few things that really stood out to me here is one, I appreciated Pat understanding. A few times he talked about his work with either candidates or electeds or communication staff, and him understanding the spin that comes from our job, right? Like that is something that you and I spent a lot of time doing. It's not lying. It's not mistruths or half-truths. It's simply the way you message and tell your side of the story or your truth on a matter. And I appreciate that he understands that and acknowledges that. I don't know that all reporters share that understanding of the spin. I think a lot of them think we're being deceived, actually trying to deceive them in that fact. And so that was something I just personally appreciated him discussing.
I will also note for our listeners that although you and I discuss the general topics that we're going to go into, we don't go through each other's questions. I thought your question to him about misinformation versus disinformation was an absolutely fantastic question. And I think it really Pat has relevancy all throughout his career, but particularly him doing fact checks, reality checks, and his analysis in response to your just great question on disinformation versus information. I thought it was a really important question, and his answer, I think, was incredibly insightful and offered a good perspective that I think we need to be focused on.
Yeah, it was something, hearing him discuss that, it was kind of the best way I've ever heard that put. And I think for the time in this, situation or reality we're faced with misinformation and disinformation. It's a good reminder to folks. And I will say, I believe, I've been on the side of both good fact checks and bad fact checks from Kessler. I think one campaign maybe even had to edit an ad. And again, it's not something you go into trying to deceive voters. You think you have the notes to back it up, but if you get a poor fact check, that's enough. I mean, that's going to be placed all over the place. Your opponent is going to take that and use it. I mean, his fact checks were certainly used, and you stood by waiting to get that, that good fact check from him. So we definitely took that serious.
I want to just circle back to a subject that I mentioned a little bit in our interview with Kessler, but I want to remind our listeners again that you were on Almanac on Friday. And one of the things that I am absolutely impressed by is the amount of prep work that you do into our shows each week. We both self-research. We both do research in rows, but your research and preparation for our podcast every week is just remarkable. And it's really interesting. And I'm really a benefit from seeing you work through that process and being able to participate in that. You were on Almanac last Friday, a public affairs show in the Twin Cities. I would consider Almanac to be one of the preeminent political analysis talk shows and commentaries in Minnesota. You did a great appearance on that episode. You got great cheers inside our household when you were on. But you take that role very seriously. Explain to our listeners a little bit who haven't been on Almanac what type of prep you did to get prepared for that, and how you portray your role as you've been on TV now in a very responsible role, an important role, is out there providing analysis and commentary on a live television show.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do take the role seriously. I think it's one thing, it was also kind of a little bit of a different hat I had to put on here. We have the opportunity to ask the questions, to be critical. In that role, I do feel as, I was on with a fellow Republican, Brian McClung, and two Democrats, a political panel with former leaders, Carla Bigham and Melissa Lopez Franzen, I'm sorry. And so, I'm up with smart people. I know that I have to know my stuff. So, I did a couple days worth of really reading about all of the things, ongoings of the legislative session, making sure that I do have, some facts, figures, some stories, anecdotes, in my back pocket to pull out should I need them. And just really, I think I talked to you. I talked to a couple other friends in the space to make sure, what topics we think are going to be discussed, what's going to be on topic. But I think it is important, again, as we're trying to frame up the Republican voice, I want to make sure that I don't do a disservice to that. So that was my goal.
You did a fantastic job, and it was great to see. And I'm really proud of you for the role that you take and the role you do in just offering analysis. You have that type of opportunity to go on a television program like that. You're entrusted by that network, that television show, with being a good, responsible voice and someone that can share the views with Minnesotans. And you helped frame that debate and discussion. And you wore a partisan hat, but you were part of that discussion. I just think I just want to say you did a great job. Very proud of you, and I hope it's something that you continue to do. Because I know, having done this podcast for this short amount of time with you, the amount of prep work and how responsibly you take it, I just thought you did a great job, and it was fun to watch you on TV. So, heck of a job there.
Thank you. And one thing I actually kind of brings to tie into one of the things that Pat had said, and before we move on, is his surprise that there wasn't more live fact checking during the CNN town hall. That was a surprise I shared, having again worked on some campaigns, congressional or in office. I've done debate prep, right? So you sit there and you prepare for any and all topics and questions. So, we're preparing the candidate, but also having to be prepared as staff, sitting in the background, for when our opponent says something that we need to send out a press release, fact check, or something to back up what our candidate says. So we sit there with, 20 pages worth of tiny little snippets, tying to articles, tying to videos, all of that. So that's something that we would prepare. And sometimes in a debate, an hour-long debate, we'd send out 20, fact check press releases to, again, to support what our candidate said against an opponent, or say, this opponent, you just heard him say this, but he actually voted this, and this. So it really is surprising to me that a network as big as CNN wasn't doing that live fact checking. These things, it's pretty easy. We knew what he was going to say on January 6th. We knew what he was going to say about the recent court case against him. I mean, so many of those things, I think you and I could have sat here and pulled articles to be able to live fact check that if we wanted to. So I do think it was a failure there, and I just had to mention that.
I agree with you, and I think on a number of levels. In different capacities in different times in our life, I think we both have been on the communication front. You are doing it much more out in the open and much more prominent role than I am, but we both have had those experiences, and it's good that I think what makes this podcast work is I think that we both have a sense of fidelity to the truth and in offering a perspective, in even when it's just our opinion. We want it to be based in fact and reasonable points, and I think that we both, I agree with you very much on that town hall forum. And as we discussed with Pat Kessler, there was a lot of frustrations about it. But I think a lot of that is on the Republican side, and we'll see how that transforms. But we'll get into more national politics on future episodes. But let's break down the next subject, which is nearing the end of the legislative session.
Yeah.
Nearing. We should put nearing. If you could see us right now, I'm putting nearing in quotations. Take it away, Becky.
So the actual end of the legislative session, May 22nd, which I have to say is a great date. It is my birthday. I was always lucky when I worked at the Capitol that was, right up there. Everybody came to the Capitol to celebrate my birthday, I used to say.
Well, let me say first, let me be the first to wish you a happy birthday.
Thank you.
And but that's good that the state recognizes that day with such formality and pomp and circumstance.
Right. So right now, as we're recording this, there's still conversations that we're going to get it done by the 18th or 19th. And last week we heard it was going to get done by the 12th. These are all self-imposed deadlines. Their work has to be done on the 22nd to not force a special session. They've blown past their deadlines. I don't know why they came out and were like, oh, we might get done by the 12th. Oh, we might get done by the 18th. They just make themselves look bad, which we'll dovetail into here a little bit of their failures. But I mean, you've been around the block a time or two here. Why did they do this? Why do they pretend they're going to get done early?
It's just optimism, hope and optimism, but it's not a plan. Nobody wastes more time than the legislature. It's a hurry up and wait mindset. And we're in that kind of crunch time right now. It's it's just planning accurately and precisely is something that's outside, I think, the scope of the legislative process. I think the legislature has gotten far too comfortable with bypassing the regular session timeframe. It's becoming standard for there to be special sessions. The name special session implies that they're supposed to be special and not happening all the time, but unfortunately they happen all the time. It doesn't matter necessarily the composition of the legislature. They just happen on a regular basis. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of penalty or punishments that's given to legislators for not finishing their work on time. They still get paid. They still get per diems, and they still get to do all that type of stuff if their work doesn't get done on time. The reality, though, what we've talked about, which is unique, not unique ever in the history of the state, but there is the DFL controls the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. And so they control kind of the main branches of the legislative process in terms of, the governor having an oversight role, but having the House and the Senate. That should, in theory, make it easier for them to get their work done on time. But it appears, as of the recording of this episode, which is, Wednesday before, we're recording this on a Wednesday for release on a Thursday, there's a good possibility that they don't get done on time.
I think we'll have to go back to some of our previous episodes when we had different legislators on. I think we asked a lot of them about if they expect to go to a special session. I think it was about 50-50. I think there were quite a few that left that opportunity on the table.
When we asked those questions, were you? I was. Let me say it this way. I was surprised by some of the answers when I asked that question. I was answering it because I would not have thought that there would have been a special session. I would have
Not at
thought they
all.
would have gotten their work done. And so I thought the question was, it wasn't necessarily a gotcha question, but it certainly, I didn't think had a good basis in a possibility, because I just made an assumption, which was wrong of me, that they were going to get done on time. But are you surprised by where they're at right now?
I am. And one of the Democrats that were on the panel with me on Friday night had mentioned that, kind of blamed it on a procedural fact that there are only so many revisers and revisions and researchers that are helping, write these laws. And so if they're tied up with one conference committee, they can't necessarily turn their attention to another one. Which to me, I understand her statement or reasoning for saying that. But to me, doesn't this go back to what we've talked about time and time and time again about the speed of which this legislation is moving? That if revisers and researchers are not able to keep up, if there's not enough staff to do this, you're going too fast. You are not. I mean, we saw, and let's go into this. I mean, the Dems in disarray, right? The DFL is truly, we're seeing all of these different situations where we saw there was Ron Latz, who's the chair of a committee debating the Uber Lyft legislation that is going on. He passed it out of committee with a quote saying, "I don't get in the habit of passing bills that I don't believe are ready, but we're going to pass this to the House floor before I believe it's ready." Excuse me, that means their job is not done. That means that bill is not ready. We do not get to vote on that on the House or Senate floor if that's the case. I mean, it is just kind of shocking. We had another situation with the tax committee. Senator Ann Rest was chairing that committee, called the committee hearing. The one House Republican that was on the committee, Rep. David, showed up. None of the House Democrats that are on that committee showed up. She took votes. She knew that this was, she even had a quote of the day saying that we clearly have an insatiable appetite for tax increases, which can't wait for the ad surrounding that one. But you're not showing up for conference committee. You have Republicans dying to sit on these committees and do the work and be heard. I mean, it is truly blowing my mind to see what the Democrats are doing. It's complete malpractice, I think, of their jobs up at the Senate and the House. And it is shocking to me that we are in this situation with everything was so honky dory, a couple days ago.
So your birthday is Sunday, correct?
Monday.
So do they get done by your birthday?
I don't think so.
Okay. Because at some point
they're leaving this weekend. There's graduations this weekend. They said that they're not going to work on Saturday.
And then
I think that will change. I think there will be some work being done, but. And
Speaker Hortman is scheduled to be giving a speech or attending a reunion in Massachusetts at the Kennedy School of Government, I believe.
Yeah.
And so there's some deadlines in there. I mean, this is what I will say. Having worked at legislature, I know we both have, is that it is a hurry up and wait mentality. It's a legislative body that wastes time. It's not super efficient. I think when we had Representative Stevens on, there were a number of, we asked him about this, and Representative Stevens was discussing a lot of the work that had been done. And what's inconsistent, I think, at the legislature is you have bursts of activity and then a huge amount of lulls. And it's fair to say that there have been moments in this legislative session where I think there was a burst of work being done, and then there was a lull. And it's in that lull, it's in that time, in that slow time is where time gets lost. And the reality, I go back to this point, which is Minnesotans, I don't believe, are in a position or know enough or are informed enough about the legislative process. I mean, no disrespect, but it isn't getting to them enough that they're missing deadlines. There hasn't been an electoral significance relayed to the voter, either because voters aren't paying attention or just they just don't. There's apathy or a number of reasons why, but there's not a history in Minnesota of legislators blowing their timeline, spending more time to get their work done, and that hurting them in the election process. Is that fair to say?
I think that's very fair to say.
And you and I live in a real world where we have to have deadlines and we have to get stuff done. And legislature, I think, is in this kind of little bit of this cocoon where they get away with this type of stuff. And we'll see as the time of this recording. I think as we said, we're both a little surprised that they're in this position. And when we have our episode next week, post birthday, we will be able to have a discussion as to where we are in the legislative process and what's going on. Is there anything else that you want to tie into before we move on to our next subject about the legislative process you want to get in?
I got to do one quick rant because on Mother's Day, it came down that a provision that was previously in both the House version and the Senate version of the tax bill, an exemption for childcare products, was removed. Something that car seats, cribs, a variety of different things didn't. While both chambers agreed on it, both chambers supported it. That exemption, which I believe accounts to something about 7 million, which is pennies when they're spending the ridiculous amount they're spending. As a new mom who has the privilege of being, a double income family, a new baby, that spent a ridiculous amount of money on these things, I can say how much families are already spending. We talked to Benson about childcare costs last week. This is just absolutely insane that they could not find the space for this, that they had to remove it on Mother's Day. And I just want to read this quick comment from House Tax Chair Aisha Gomez that said, "Our tax bill is laser focused on making Minnesota the best place to raise children. We make targeted investments that reduce child poverty for low-income families, and there are other provisions that would have greater effect than the baby product exemption. Our bill maintains tax exemptions for diapers and formula and spends $800 million to cut child poverty by a quarter. We'll continue to work cooperatively, blah, blah, blah." Now, do I appreciate that there are working on child poverty? Absolutely. However, to me, this is I basically saying you're lucky you're keeping these exemptions you get. Be appreciative of that and move on. I think it is just really disappointing. I just saw, as we've been tweeting this or recording this, a tweet come up that they're discussing raising the gas tax. These are taxes on everyday families across the state that matter, and they're doing that, making us pay more every day to let them go on a spending spree in situations that I believe, maybe this is me wearing my Republican hat here, I believe makes Minnesotans dependent on them to continue spending. Sure, you are doing free lunches, but at the expense of making folks pay more at the store. Once again, Democrats are not allowing Republicans to spend our money how we see fit. They want to take more from us to spend it how they see fit, which I believe is really disappointing for a lot of families. And that's my rant of the day that I just had to go on.
I think it was a great rant. I wasn't going to do anything to interrupt it. It was a great rant. I do think it's interesting. I think a messaging point as we cap off this subject is when we get back next week, post birthday, if the legislative session is done or it's not, I think we should be having more of a discussion on the tax increases, because I think both of us, if we're putting on our Republican hats, are frustrated with the fact that with the size of the surplus that we have, and I do believe this was a point that was discussed on Almanac, that there's a discussion about tax increases. Even this late breaking development as we were recording about the governor talking about a potential gas tax increase. The amount of taxes that have been increased this legislative session like this when we have a surplus is just astounding.
Sure is. But now let's change the pace a little bit. Let's go into our wonderful takes on soda. And I want to start here, if I may, by saying when we were chatting about what our topic was going to be for this, you said soda. Now, I also refer to it as soda. I would wonder if the majority of our listeners refer to it as soda or pop.
I'm a soda guy.
I'm a soda gal.
Yep.
So we'll have to wait and see.
I am preparing myself more than any subject. Now, a couple of things. If there's one thing that I have a drinking problem with, is soda. I love soda. I love sugar soda. And so this is a very passionate subject for me. I am preparing myself to be disappointed.
You may be.
I am preparing myself to be disappointed. We're also going to talk at some point about one of the other subjects that we were going to discuss, but I'm not getting into it right now.
Okay.
One of the other food categories we were going to discuss that is worthy of much more time than I can give it right now. But in order to just prep me for the disappointment, I'm going to let you go first with your, and I think I know the answer, but let's go with it.
It is by far and large Diet Coke. It's not Diet Pepsi. It's not Diet Cola. If I go to a restaurant and I am looking for a soda, I say, do you have Coke or Pepsi? They say Pepsi. I will have a water, please. I do not do Diet Pepsi. It is Diet Coke all the way. I have a shirt that says, drink Diet Coke and, keep calm and drink Diet Coke. We're a Diet Coke fam over here.
Now I knew that you're such a Diet Coke fan that I wanted to preface and say, I was worried when we were doing this subject that all 5 would be Diet Coke.
I did contemplate. I will say although with my, kind of working between the lines a little bit on the last few, I felt as though you would have a problem with that. So I did come up with 4 others.
That's great. You'd be surprised to know, you may not be surprised to know, that I hate diet soda like I hate the Green Bay Packers. I think diet soda is terrible. Every aspect of diet soda. I can't imagine having a diet soda. It just drives me crazy. Makes me angry even thinking about it. It just makes me angry. So my number 1 soda is Coke.
Ugh.
My number 1 is Coke, but Coke caffeine-free Coca-Cola. I'm a big fan of caffeine-free Coke. Number 1, if I could, I don't ever want to, there will never be a day that I don't have soda in my life. If they come out and make a determination that soda will trim years off your life, I'm going to go that way because there's no way I can not have soda in my life.
Now, how many are we talking a day?
Oh, I'll maybe have a couple a week, but when I have them, I cherish them like one of my kids. I have to have them. I can't imagine the type of lifestyle changes that I would have to make in my life for me to have diet soda. I just feel like I'd be giving up. It's just terrible.
Ugh, delicious.
Yeah, I need to have the sugar.
Nectar of the gods.
Yes.
All right, number 2. You're going to be upset with me, but is Diet Dr. Pepper. I would do a regular Dr. Pepper too. I would put both of them at number 2, but if I'm going to have one, I do prefer the diet. It's just the sugar. I can't handle it. It's so sweet.
Yeah, and if we're not recording these on video yet, but we hope to in the future. You'd be seeing my face of disgust right now with that answer. You'd be surprised to know that I have no diet on mine.
I'm not surprised.
All right, I'm going 1919 root beer. It's in Minnesota. Brewed. It's bottled in Minnesota, made in Minnesota, New Ulm. It is fantastic root beer. I love it. And 1919. When I'm feeling kind of saucy, I'll get it's somewhat. Let me also say, big cans. Getting a 12-pack is not cheap. Sometimes they make these barrel ones. They're great at like graduation parties, stuff like that. I love 1919 root beer. It's the way to go. It's one of my favorite kegs.
My number 3 is an ode to a sugary soda here, and in particular, back in my, I don't have the privilege of having too many cocktails these days, but back in my day of having too many cocktails, an ice cold Mountain Dew in the morning. Bring on that sugar, that caffeine. I like it.
Straight Mountain Dew?
Yeah.
I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
That makes up for the first 2.
I don't like the Diet Mountain Dew taste to me. That's not the same. The other 2 are superior. This one, I just can't cut it.
Now since I consider myself a soda pop connoisseur, my list might be a little eclectic to a lot of people, but there's a soda called Cheerwine. It's a soda that's it's big in like the South, North Carolina. There's been a huge, and it's a kind of cherry cola. Cheerwine. You can get it at most specialty stores. You can get it at I can get it at Hy-Vee. I can get it at Lund's. I can get it. I don't think I can get it at Cub, but it's great. It's a cherry flavored soda. It's really big in like North and South Carolina. It's just a fantastic soda. It's regional, somewhat regional, but with kind of the rise of kind of getting the kind of sodas everywhere. It's a fantastic soda. I love it. Fantastic.
We're going to have to start reining things into things that people have actually heard of before.
It's on the internet. You can get it anywhere. You could get it today.
Okay.
All right.
Number 4, I've got Fresca.
So let me just say this to you. I knew Fresca would make your list. I didn't know when it was going to make it, but if I came up with my disappointment list, I knew Fresca would be on it. Fresca would be on it. I mean, seriously, you took shots at me last week, and others did too, for my Charleston Chew. Do they serve that in the nursing home where you go to?
Fresca is just delicious. It's fantastic.
It is good. But I knew it was going to be on your list. I knew that's the type of garbage soda that would be on your list. I'm going to go with Crush Orange Soda.
I knew you were going to have an orange soda. I was thinking you were a high C guy, though.
Crush Orange Soda.
All
I
right.
love good Crush Soda. Love it. It's a Friday night and I've earned it, I'll have a Crush Soda. It's fantastic. It's good for you too. It's vitamin C.
Well, there you go.
All right.
Now, rounding out my list, I did have a number 5 that I scratched. I was going to say Mr. Pibb. I thought you were going to give me a hard time. That's basically just cheap man's Dr. Pepper. Delicious. So I changed it and I'm going 7-Up.
Wow. That's just a 7-Up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Less syrupy than Sprite. Delicious.
I like 7-Up with grenadine.
Mm.
Nice Shirley Temple.
City cocktail, yeah.
Be surprised to know that I have grenadine I have probably multiple bottles of grenadine in my house. What we're coming to realize from this is how much I use sugar and how much I'm addicted to it. That's what I'm coming to the realization. My final soda, this is a game day soda. I generally like to have this on game days when I'm watching the Vikings game. It's Sunday Purple. It's made by the Northern Soda Company. It's a Minnesota-based company. And it's like a purple, it's like a grape kind of vanilla drink. It's fantastic. You get it at where all your kind of specialty sodas are sold. It's fantastic. Northern made soda. Northern Soda Company is a Minnesota-based company. They make a ton of great flavors. But Sunday Purple is it.
We're going to have to send this out and try to get some ad sponsors based on all your Minnesota.
God, that would be great. I love sugar soda. And it's very, my list, I think, reflects, a connoisseur of sodas. I think of all the subjects that we've discussed so far that's made it through kind of the editorial process, this is the one where is the most passionate to me. This is the one that's most meaningful to me. And it's also the one where I knew you were going to disappoint me the most.
Okay,
and you succeeded.
They're delicious.
And you succeeded, okay?
Well, at least I have choices that people have heard of. So
yes, exactly. That's exactly it. So, well, we'll see. We've gotten a lot of good reaction to the list discussion, and I'm sure this list will, as if past is a prediction, you will face some online criticism for your selection, and I will be embraced as being thoughtful once again.
Okay, we'll have to wait and see. Don't disappoint me, people. Give him a hard time.
That's right.
Now for Tweet of the Week.
Tweets of the week.
Am I
gonna cry?
No, come on. We're past that.
We're only past that because you were peppered for a few weeks.
You may cry if you are a staffer for Senator Amy Klobuchar with this one. My tweet this week is from @ClimateDefiance. They said, breaking, we just made the pro-oil Senator Amy Klobuchar flee the stage at her book launch party. Her book title, The Joy of Politics. Now, there is a video with this. This is something we've seen a lot of, we've talked about protesters infiltrating different events and what they do here. My favorite part, in I guess poor choice because you can't see this through the podcast, but if you look at the video, the look that Senator Klobuchar very clearly shoots one of her staff members as a WTF, how did you let this happen? As her book launch is ruined and she has to leave the stage, was just magnifico.
I will say from a security standpoint, I was a little surprised about the access there. That's a subject that you and I have been consistent on, that elected officials need better security. But yes, I did see the same death stares.
Yes.
My tweet of the week is from Amy Hockert, who's a journalist in the Twin Cities here with Fox 9. This was a Mother's Day tweet that I really identified with. And she wrote, she goes, "The best advice my mom ever gave me when I was 12, when I was 12, and she bought me my first stick of deodorant. She goes, if you can smell yourself, others can smell you." And I really identified with that tweet because I remember getting the same speech from my mom. I haven't been on social media that much as I still kind of convalesce and recover here. But that was just a great Mother's Day tweet that I absolutely loved. And I can distinctly remember when I was a kid getting Brute deodorant and my mom getting it for me and her saying something very similar. Look, if you can smell yourself, others can smell you. So, and there's just kind of this stinky age where teenage boys get into.
Oh, yeah.
So I just really identified with that tweet, and it was worthy of praise. Well, Becky, we made it another week. I want to thank you for being here and making time. This is multiple media appearances for you in the last week, so I appreciate you spending time back on the podcast here from your other TV appearances.
I am so glad to be here. It's the joy and highlight of every week.
Well, wonderful. Well, we want to thank everyone for listening to the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also leave a review on our website at bbreakpod.com. That's bbreakpod.com. We're also on Twitter at @bbreakpod. That's at @bbreakpod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week with another great episode. Becky, thank you again.
Thank you.
And we'll see y'all next week.
All right, bye.